A lonely melody drifts through an ancient forest, played on pipes of reed and bone. This is the call of a forgotten tribe, the Pains, a whole race of goat-legged spirits who ruled the wild places of the ancient world. While their famous father, the god Pan, often takes the spotlight, their story is far richer and more chaotic. By the end of this journey, you will understand how these mischievous beings shaped myths, inspired art, and even gave a name to our most primal fear. We will uncover why an entire tribe of nature spirits faded from common memory, and how their wild essence survived, transforming into symbols in our poetry, our psychology, and even our modern anxieties. What forgotten part of the natural world do you think these spirits truly represent? The Pains were never a solitary figure in the shadows, they were a chorus. A whole tribe of spirits born from the same wild source, their lineage tracing directly back to the most famous goat-legged god of them all. Their primary father was Pan himself. In the logic of ancient myth, this makes perfect sense. Pan was not just a god of the wild, he was its very embodiment, a force of raw, untamed nature. And nature, by its very definition, is prolific. It spreads, it multiplies, it fills every niche. So from Pan, through unions with nymphs of the mountain and the forest, came countless sons who mirrored his form and his spirit. They were, in essence, his legacy multiplied across every hillside and grove. Some stories, however, weave a more complex family tree. A few myths suggest other rustic gods, like the swift messenger Hermes or the ecstatic Dionysus, could also be their fathers. This isn't a contradiction, but rather a clue. It tells us that the idea of the Pains was bigger than one parent. They represented a whole category of being, the spirit of the wild place itself, which could spring from several divine sources connected to nature, travel, and uninhibited joy. Their birth was always from the union of the divine and the primal. A god meeting the spirit of a lonely mountain or a deep forest would result in these goat-legged children. They were not carefully crafted Olympians born in palaces. They were born from the land, literally. Think of a sudden, echoing laugh that rolls down a deserted valley, or the unexplained rustle in a thicket when no wind is blowing. That sensation, that presence, was a pain. They were the personality of the wilderness given legs, horns, and a playful, often mischievous will. So while we know the name of their most famous father, their true origin is more profound. They are the children of the wild world's marriage to the divine, and as any family does, they grew in number, spilling out from their birthplace to claim their own territories, their own lonely mountains, waiting for a traveler to cross their path. Their physical form was a walking manifesto of the wild. From the waist up, a Pain could appear almost human, possessing the torso, arms, and face of a man, often bearded and rugged. But from the hips down, the civilization ended. In its place were the powerful, hairy hind legs of a goat, culminating in hard, cloven hooves. This was no accident of birth, but a perfect representation of their essence. The human half spoke to a conscious, playful intelligence, a spirit that could pipe a melody or whisper a taunt. The goat half was pure, unbridled nature. Those legs were built for the steep, rocky slopes no human could easily climb. The hooves could find purchase on the sheerest cliff face, symbolizing their total mastery over the most treacherous and untouched landscapes. Often, this hybrid form was completed with short, curved horns sprouting from their foreheads and a flicking goat's tail, leaving no doubt about their animal nature. To the ancient Greeks, this form was not inherently monstrous. It was symbolic, a direct visual link to the animal world and the untamed earth itself. They were creatures of the boundary, the literal embodiment of the line where the cultivated field met the unforgiving mountain. This is where a common confusion arises. Many people today use the words satyr and faun interchangeably, but the ancient sources often drew a clear physical distinction. satyrs, the companions of the wine god Dionysus, were consistently depicted with horse-like features. They had the tails, ears, and sometimes the legs of horses, creatures of passion and frenzy. The pains, children of a different wilderness, were firmly of the goat. This was a distinction of habitat and temperament. The horse is a creature of open plains and driven energy, while the goat is a creature of high, lonely, and stable places. One suggests a rushing bacchanal, the other the enduring, watchful spirit of the highland. You can see this distinction captured in the art they left behind. On red figure pottery from Athens, you might spot a revelrous satyr with a horse tail, while on a carved relief from a remote Arcadian temple, a goat-legged pain stands silently among the pine trees. In sculpture, the sinewy strength of a goat's leg carved in marble tells a story of a different kind of power, one of balance, patience, and an ancient connection to the stone itself. Their form was their function, a perfect adaptation to the world they personified, a constant reminder that some spirits were never meant to walk on flat, human ground. These goat-legged spirits claimed the wildest corners of the map as their sovereign territory. You would never find a pain in a bustling city or a quiet village, and even the grand temples of the Olympians felt too structured, too polished for their rough nature. Their kingdom was the untouched world. Think of the dense, shadowy forests where sunlight falls in broken patches on the mossy floor, a place where the air itself feels ancient and watchful. Imagine the craggy, wind-scoured mountain peaks where the only sounds are the whistle of the air and the distant tumble of a rock. They dwelled in hidden valleys accessible only by secret goat trails, and in remote groves of oak or pine so still you could hear your own heartbeat. Every lonely, echoing place, every stretch of land that made a human traveler feel small and profoundly alone, that was the potential home of a pain. They were not wanderers in these spaces, they were the essence of them. In the ancient Roman understanding, they were the genius loci, the protective spirit of a specific place. A particular spring that never ran dry, a strangely shaped rock formation that commanded a view, a grove of trees that seemed to whisper in unison, each had its own pain. This spirit was both the soul of the location and its guardian. It was a symbiotic relationship. The pain drew its power and identity from the wild beauty and solitude of its home, and in return, it protected that place from desecration or careless intrusion. A traveler who respected the land, who left an offering at a spring or simply passed through with quiet reverence, might hear nothing more than the distant, haunting sound of pipes on the wind. But someone who sought to cut down the sacred grove or pollute the clear pool would soon meet the territory's fierce and mischievous defender. Their adventures, therefore, were not journeys to far-off lands but the daily drama of their domain. A storm rolling over their mountain was an event. The migration of deer through their valley was a spectacle, and the rare, clumsy arrival of a human into their realm was the greatest entertainment of all. To understand a pain, you must first picture the profound silence and deep green shadows of its home, for its character was carved by the landscape it embodied. What kind of personality do you think would emerge from a lifetime spent in such absolute, echoing solitude? This chaotic nature was not born from malice, but from a simple, profound truth. The pains were creatures of pure instinct, ruled by the same unpredictable forces that governed the wilderness they called home. A sudden gust of wind, a cracking branch, the unexplained movement in the undergrowth, these were not just events, they were expressions of the pain's spirit. They did not plot or scheme with human cunning, they simply acted on impulse, their moods shifting as quickly as the weather on a mountain peak. Their primary amusement was the human traveler who strayed into their realm. To a pain, a lonely shepherd or a lost merchant was the most fascinating toy. They would mimic voices, calling out a familiar name from just behind a thick stand of trees, leading the person off the path in confusion. They could throw their own voices, making whispers seem to come from rocks or streams, creating a disorienting chorus of unseen watchers. The sound of their reed pipes, often beautiful from a distance, could become suddenly discordant and jarring when played right behind a person, shattering the forest's silence with a shocking blast of noise. These were not acts of cruelty, but a form of primal play. Think of it as the mountain itself teasing you, the forest testing your nerve. For the pains, human confusion and surprise were simply interesting reactions, a break in the monotony of their eternal watch. This playfulness, however, had a razor-thin edge. The same spirit that might play a lilting tune could, in a heartbeat, inspire a much darker emotion. If their mischief turned to irritation, or if they simply wished to see what would happen, they could amplify a traveler's natural apprehension into something overwhelming. The faint rustle would become a threatening crash. The odd shadow would seem to move with purpose. This was their most famous power, the ability to induce panic, a word that literally means of Pan. This panic was not mere fear. It was a sudden, unreasoning, and contagious terror that stripped away logic and sent humans fleeing blindly through the woods, often to their own harm. One moment you might glimpse a goat-legged figure watching calmly from a cliff, and the next you could be consumed by a dread so profound you'd run without knowing why. This duality, the shift from playful piper to source of primal terror, was the core of their identity. They were as capricious as a sunlit glade that could, without warning, be swallowed by a fast-moving storm. They reminded all who entered the wild that nature is not a gentle host. It can be whimsical, breathtaking, and serene, but it is always fundamentally unpredictable. And in that unpredictability lies both its beauty and its ancient, formidable power. This power to sow terror gave the world a word we still use today, panic. It comes directly from the name of their father, Pan, a legacy stamped into our very language. This was no ordinary fear. It was a sudden, irrational, and wildly contagious dread that could sweep through a crowd like a silent wildfire, bypassing all reason and logic. For the Pains, it was the ultimate expression of their wild nature, a psychological stampede they could trigger with a glance or a shriek. They specialized in turning order into chaos, especially among groups. A disciplined army marching through a mountain pass might suddenly break ranks, soldiers dropping their shields and running in all directions, convinced an invisible enemy was upon them. A settled herd of cattle could erupt into a mindless stampede from a single, unseen rustle in the trees. This panic was a weapon of the wilderness itself, leveling the playing field between the civilized group and the untamed wild. It rendered numbers and strategy meaningless, reducing humans to their most primal instinct to flee. One of the most famous echoes of this power comes from the Battle of Marathon. Ancient historians like Herodotus reported that during that pivotal clash, a great, unreasoning fear fell upon the invading Persian army. The Greeks credited their own fighting spirit, but later tradition whispered that the wild god Pan, hearing the pleas of the Athenians, had answered by casting his signature terror into the hearts of their enemies. Whether myth or heightened memory, the story perfectly captures the concept. The Persians, a vast and ordered force on foreign soil, were undone by a terror that seemed to come from the landscape itself. This is the key to understanding panic as their weapon. It wasn't about physical strength, it was about psychological invasion. The wilderness, through the Pains, could reach into the mind and find the latent fear of the unknown, the dark, and the unseen, then amplify it until it became the only reality. It turned the environment into an active adversary. The rustling leaves became advancing footsteps. The echo in a canyon became a hostile war cry. In a world before psychology, this phenomenon had a name and a face, a tribe of goat-legged spirits who were the living embodiment of nature's capacity to unravel the human mind. What does it say about us that we still have a specific word for this exact primal form of fear, and that its origin lies not in a monster but in the wild places of the earth? Yet for all their capacity for terror, the Pains possessed an equally potent gift for beauty. They were the undisputed musical masters of the wild, and their instrument of choice was the syrinx, the set of reed pipes we now call the panpipes. The very creation of this instrument is a story of wild transformation. The myth tells us the god Pan once pursued a beautiful river nymph named Syrinx. Desperate to escape his advances, she fled to the river's edge and pleaded with her sister nymphs for help. The moment Pan reached for her, they transformed her into a bed of hollow marsh reeds. The frustrated god, hearing the wind sigh through the stalks, was captivated by the mournful, whispering sound. He cut reeds of varying lengths, bound them together with wax, and fashioned the first set of pipes, naming them after the nymph he could never hold. This origin is everything. The instrument was born from unrequited desire, from the voice of nature itself, and from an act of improvisation with materials at hand. It was not crafted in a workshop, but seized from a riverbank in a moment of inspired passion. This is the music of the pains. It was not written down or composed with structure in mind. It was breath and wind channeled through reeds, a sound that belonged entirely to the moment it was played. Their melodies could be hauntingly beautiful, a gentle, rustic tune that seemed to calm the forest itself. With such music, they could charm animals from their burrows, drawing wolves and deer to listen in a silent circle. They could even lure shy nymphs from their hiding places, the melody speaking to something deep and natural within them. But just as their moods could shift, so could their music. The same pipes could produce a frantic, jangling rhythm that twisted the peaceful woods into a place of eerie tension. The notes could become disjointed and sharp, amplifying the loneliness of a place until it felt actively hostile. This rustic music stood in direct opposition to the ordered, harmonic strains of the lyre, the instrument of the god Apollo. Apollo's music represented civilization, reason, and mathematical harmony. It was the music of the city, the temple, and the structured human mind. The panpipes of the Pains were the music of the untamed heart. They represented instinct, raw emotion, and the unpredictable rhythms of the natural world. This contrast was more than artistic preference, it was a fundamental clash of values. One sound sought to bring the cosmos into orderly alignment, the other sought to express the wild, uncharted chaos within it. When you heard the panpipes echoing from a distant hillside at dusk, you were not hearing a song, you were hearing the wilderness thinking aloud in tones of longing, mischief, and profound, ancient solitude. This wild music was often a prelude to their most infamous pursuit, the chaotic chase of the nymphs through the sun-dappled woods. These beautiful female spirits embodied every specific aspect of nature, from towering trees and flowing springs to gentle meadows. The Pains, driven by pure instinct, were perpetually captivated by them. In countless myths and on endless pieces of ancient pottery, we see the same scene unfold. A nymph, her face a mix of alarm and determination, flees through the forest. Close behind, a goat-legged Pain gives chase, his expression one of playful, relentless desire. This was a central motif of the rustic world, but to view it as mere romance is to misunderstand it completely. These stories were not love tales, they were brutal, dynamic diagrams of natural forces in collision. They represented the unchecked, consuming desire of one wild thing for another, a raw impulse as fundamental as a river eroding a bank or a storm seeking a valley. The chase itself was the point, a violent and playful interplay. The nymphs were not passive victims, they were elusive forces of nature in their own right. They could transform, vanish into the elements they personified, or use the landscape itself to evade capture. A dryad might melt into the bark of her tree. A naiad could dive into her spring and become one with the water. The pursuit was a chaotic dance where both parties were expressions of the wild, one pursuing, the other fleeing, in a cycle that had no civilized conclusion. Specific names echo through these stories. There was Echo, the talkative nymph cursed to only repeat the words of others, who faded away from unrequited love until only her voice remained in the mountains, a perfect symbol of elusive sound pursued by silent, goat-legged listeners. And of course, there was Syrinx, whose transformation into the river reeds gave the Pains their very instrument. Her story is the archetype, the nymph who escapes total possession by becoming something else entirely, leaving behind only a haunting sound for her pursuer. In art, these scenes are never still. On a Greek vase, the chase whirls around the curved surface, a frozen moment of frantic motion. The nymph's robes stream behind her, the Pain's muscles strain, and the trees seem to lean in as witnesses. This relentless imagery served as a powerful metaphor. It illustrated the dynamic, often aggressive, interplay of natural forces, the way wind pursues leaf, river pursues stone, and life perpetually seeks to consume and transform. It was nature, in all its beautiful and terrifying fertility, playing out its own endless, untamed story. This wild, untamed energy inevitably drew them to the most chaotic force in the Greek pantheon, the god Dionysus. While their father Pan ruled the lonely places, Dionysus commanded the frenzy that could erupt anywhere, shattering the calm of a village square as easily as a forest glade. The Pains found their natural home within his ecstatic retinue, a traveling carnival of chaos known as the Thyasos. Here, they were no longer solitary watchers of mountain passes, but part of a roaring, moving spectacle. They marched alongside the wine-crazed Maenads, mortal women possessed by divine madness, and the horse-tailed satyrs, their cousins in revelry. In this company, the distinctions between spirits blurred in a shared purpose to tear down the walls of civilized restraint. Their role in the Thyasos was vital and loud. They provided the relentless, driving soundtrack to divine madness. Their panpipes, which on a lonely hill could sound so mournful, here shrieked with frenetic, pulsating rhythms. They beat on drums made of stretched hide, a primal heartbeat that urged the procession forward. And they danced not with grace, but with a clumsy, joyous abandon, their goat legs kicking high, their bodies contorting in rhythms that mirrored the twisting of grapevines and the stumbling steps of intoxication. This was not mere partying, it was a sacred, terrifying ritual. The Dionysian Thyasos represented the temporary but necessary overthrow of all order, the liberation of instinct society usually repressed. The Pains, as creatures of pure instinct, were the perfect embodiments of this philosophy. Their very form, half human and half beast, visually proclaimed the breakdown of the boundary between the civilized self and the wild animal within. In the swirling dust of the procession, they became living symbols of the ecstatic release that Dionysus promised, a release that could lead to transcendent joy or terrifying violence, often within the same breath. By joining this major religious movement, the Pains were woven directly into the fabric of Greek cultural anxiety and aspiration. They were no longer just spirits of the remote wilderness, they were the wildness that could invade the city itself during a Dionysian festival, a reminder that the chaos of nature was not outside the walls but sleeping within every human heart. For the herdsman tending his flock on a lonely mountainside, the Pains were not just mythical figures, they were neighbors. This relationship was a daily, delicate negotiation with the spirits of the very land his animals grazed. On one hand, these goat-legged beings were a constant, lurking peril. Their sudden shrieks or discordant pipe music could send a settled herd of sheep or goats into a blind, stampeding panic over a cliff edge. A single mischievous pain could undo a year's careful husbandry in a few moments of primal terror. Yet, in the same breath, these spirits were also considered powerful protectors. Who better to guard a herd of goats than a creature that was half goat itself, who knew every crag and predator in the territory? This was the essential duality for those who lived by nature's rhythms. The wild force that could destroy your livelihood was also the only force that could truly secure it. To ensure the latter and avoid the former, herdsmen practiced a simple, pragmatic form of worship. They would leave small offerings at the mouth of a cave where a pain was thought to dwell, or before a curiously shaped, weathered stone that served as a rustic shrine. A bit of milk poured onto the earth, a few early fruits placed in a hollow, a simple garland of wildflowers. These were gestures of respect, a toll paid to the local spirit for safe passage and protection. They were bribes in a sense, but also acknowledgments of a shared space. The herdsman understood he was not the master of this landscape, he was a guest in the pain's domain. This relationship extended beyond simple protection to the very fertility of the flock. As symbols of untamed nature, the pains were also fonts of raw, generative power. Their presence in a pasture or near a spring was believed to encourage the health and multiplication of the animals. A shepherd might even hope to glimpse one during the spring, taking it as a potent omen for many lambs and kids in the coming season. This complex bond shows how mythology was woven directly into survival. The herdsman's daily prayer was not for abstract blessings, but for the capricious spirit on the hill to be in a good mood, to watch over his animals with a guardian's eye rather than a trickster's whim. His world was one where the divine was immediate, temperamental, and as real as the mountain wind, a force you could neither control nor afford to ignore. The wild, untamed nature of the pains did not escape the notice of Greek philosophers, who saw in these chaotic spirits a profound challenge to civilized life. While the poets told stories of their chases and music, thinkers began to interpret them as symbols of a deeper truth. The most striking example is the cynic philosopher Diogenes, who famously lived in a large ceramic jar and scorned all social conventions. He was nicknamed the dog for his shameless public lifestyle, but his philosophy resonated with a distinctly Pan-like spirit. Like the goat-legged beings of the wilderness, Diogenes rejected the polished lies of the city, embracing a raw, natural existence free from artificial wants. He sought to live according to nature, not custom, and in doing so, he embodied the same primal, unsettling freedom that the pains represented. He was a human mirror to those spirits, proving that the wild was not just a place, but a state of being one could choose, even in the heart of Athens. This philosophical lens transformed the pains from mere sprites into potent ideas. Their very name began to take on a grander meaning. In the later centuries of ancient thought, some philosophers played with the word pan, linking it to the Greek word pan, meaning all or every. In this elevated interpretation, the god Pan, and by extension his tribe, was no longer just a rustic deity of the mountains. He became a symbol of the universal, all-encompassing nature of the divine, present in every leaf, stone, and creature. The pains, therefore, were not isolated spirits of specific groves, but countless manifestations of this singular, pervasive natural force. This was a staggering leap from local genii of a spring to fragments of a cosmic principle. It was an attempt to find a unifying, sacred logic behind the beautiful chaos of the world. The philosopher Plotinus, centuries later, would describe the natural world as a living, intelligent being whose every part was sacred. In this light, the playful, terrifying pains could be seen as the active expressions of that world soul, its myriad voices and moods. They were the divine not in a distant, perfect form, but in its immediate, untamed, and sometimes frightening immanence. This philosophical redemption asked a difficult question. Could true wisdom lie not in rising above nature, but in recognizing the sacred intelligence within its every wild and whimsical detail? The visual story of the pains is painted and carved across centuries of ancient art. On the black figure pottery of 6th century Athens, they appear as dark, agile silhouettes against the orange clay, their goat legs unmistakable as they dance in the riotous train of Dionysus. Flip the vessel and the scene might shift to a solitary pursuit, a single pain lunging after a nimble nymph through a forest of stylized vines. When the technique evolved to red figure, more detail emerged. We see the shaggy texture of their goat haunches, the focused intensity in their eyes, and the rustic simplicity of their panpipes or a shepherd's staff. These were not grand temple statues, but images on everyday objects, a constant, playful reminder of the wild world just beyond the city walls. As Greek culture spread, so did their image, evolving with new artistic tastes. In the lush, naturalistic mosaics of the Hellenistic and Roman world, the Pains found a new home. They became fixtures of idealized landscapes, lounging beside sparkling fountains in garden scenes or resting in shaded grottos. The volcanic ash of Pompeii preserved their likeness in stunning frescoes, where they appear not as terrifying agents of panic, but as charming, almost domesticated elements of a wealthy Roman's pastoral fantasy. Here, they are often shown with specific attributes that tell us about their perceived roles. Many carry the lagabolon, a curved throwing stick used for hunting hares, marking them as hunters of the wilds. Others clutch a wineskin, a direct link to the Dionysian revelry they so loved. A common pose shows them in a state of relaxed repose, leaning on a rock or a tree, one goat leg crossed over the other, often caught in a moment of musical contemplation as they play their syrinx. This artistic journey, from the chaotic chase on a Greek cup to the decorative garden spirit in a Roman villa, traces a fascinating path. It shows how these primal beings were gradually softened, aestheticized, and woven into the fabric of a tamed, artistic nature, even as their essential, wild form remained perfectly recognizable. But the story of these goat-legged spirits did not end at the borders of Greece. As Roman culture absorbed and reshaped the myths of its neighbors, the Pains underwent a fascinating transformation, emerging in Italy under new names with a slightly different character. The Romans worshipped a rustic god named Faunus, a deity of forests, fields, and flocks who, much like Pan, could inspire sudden fear in the wild places. His children were the fauns, the direct Roman counterparts to the Greek Pains. At first glance, they seem identical, sharing the same hybrid form of human and goat, the same connection to untamed nature, and the same fondness for music and mischief. Yet, if you listen closely to the Roman stories, a subtle shift in their nature becomes clear. While the Greek Pains were often agents of pure, unpredictable chaos, the Roman fauns were frequently seen as slightly more integrated into the rhythms of the land. They were still wild, still capable of playful tricks, but they also gained a reputation for a gentler, more oracular wisdom. Faunus himself was sometimes consulted as a prophetic voice. In sacred groves, particularly one on the Tiber Island in Rome, people would sleep on the fleece of a sacrificed sheep in a ritual called incubation, hoping the god would send dreams to reveal the future or offer advice. This prophetic aspect bled into the perception of the fauns. They became not just the spirit of a place, but potentially its wise, whispering voice. This difference reflects the distinct cultural lenses through which these civilizations viewed the wild. The Greeks often saw wilderness as a beautiful but fundamentally untamable and terrifying force, separate from the ordered polis. The Romans, practical farmers and engineers, still revered nature's power but were more focused on understanding its patterns and harnessing its bounty. The fauns, therefore, could be seen as slightly more approachable, as spirits you might not only fear, but occasionally seek out for guidance. Their enduring appeal, however, remained firmly rooted in their hybrid form and their embodiment of the natural world. From the lonely mountains of Arcadia to the sacred groves of Latium, the core idea persisted. A tribe of goat-legged beings serving as the ancient world's most vivid reminder that the landscape itself was alive, watchful, and filled with a voice that was both playful and profoundly old. Their journey from the mountain grove to the written page began with a whisper in the oldest Greek stories. In the epic verses of Homer, the Pains themselves are never named, but many scholars hear their faint echo in a peculiar collective spirit. Homer speaks of the satyrs, but in contexts that feel rugged and wild, more goat than horse. He describes them as a tribe of worthless fellows, inseparable from the god Hermes, dancing on the high mountain peaks. This vague, early sketch feels less like the Dionysian revelers of later art and more like a prototype of those goat-legged watchers of the lonely places. It is a ghost of an idea not yet fully formed, waiting for its time in the literary sun. That time arrived centuries later, not in the grand epics of war, but in the quiet, deliberate verses of pastoral poetry. Here, in the invented world of shepherds and song, the Paeans found their true literary home. The Sicilian poet Theocritus, writing in the 3rd century before the Common Era, crafted these idyllic scenes of rustic life, and he populated them with the spirits of the land. In his poems, the Paeans are no longer shadowy terrors, but essential fixtures of a harmonious, idealized nature. They become the gentle guardians of the shepherd's world. Listen to how Theocritus paints one in his first idyll. He writes, "And I will read a short piece for you. Sweet is the whispered music of yonder pine that sings goatherd over the water spring, and sweet, too, your piping. You shall bear away the second prize after Pan. Should he take the horned goat, the she-goat shall be your prize, but should he choose the she-goat for himself, the kid will fall to you." In these lines, Pan is not a source of panic, but the supreme judge of a musical contest, a respected part of the pastoral community. This is the Paean reimagined, softened by the poet's lens into a figure of artistic authority and natural order. The Roman poet Virgil would later master this tradition in his eclogues, deepening the association between these spirits and an idealized, lost world of peace he called Arcadia. In Virgil's verses, the fauns and woodland gods are invoked to bring blessing and cool shade to the flocks, their presence a guarantee of the landscape's perfection. This poetic image, so gentle and serene, stands in stark contrast to the myths of terrifying chases and mind-shattering panic. It reveals a fascinating duality in how the ancient world saw the wild. In one tradition, it was a realm of raw, dangerous power. In another, it was a nostalgic dream of simplicity and beauty, and the Paeans were the gentle keepers of that dream. Their literary footprint shows us that mythology was never static. It was a conversation where poets could take the same wild clay and sculpt it into something new, something that spoke less to primal fear and more to the human longing for a peaceful, enchanted world just beyond the pasture fence. That poetic vision of gentle shepherds and musical contests could not survive the coming storm. As the ancient world gave way to the Christian Middle Ages, the landscape of belief was utterly rewritten, and the Paeans were caught in the crossfire. Their familiar form, once a symbol of untamed nature, now became a template for pure evil. Those goat legs, curved horns, and cloven hooves were a gift to medieval artists and theologians looking for a physical representation of the demonic. The devil himself, in countless paintings and church carvings, began to appear with the unmistakable features of a Pan, a direct visual inheritance from these pagan spirits. This was not a coincidence, but a deliberate act of cultural conquest. The old gods and spirits of the natural world were systematically recast as demons, lies, or dangerous illusions meant to lead the faithful astray. The Paeans, with their blatant animality and connection to wild, unconsecrated places, were perfect candidates for this demonization. They were no longer the genius of a sacred grove, they were the lurking fiend in the haunted wood. Their music, once the sound of rustic beauty, was now the siren song of temptation. Their playful chase of nymphs became a grotesque allegory for lust and sinful desire. In the rigid moral framework of the medieval church, nature itself was often viewed with deep suspicion, a fallen realm separate from God's grace, and the Paeans became the ultimate emblem of that corrupted, untamed state. You can see this transformation carved in stone on the very walls of cathedrals meant to inspire piety. Look up at the rain spouts and roof edges, and you might find their leering faces among the gargoyles. These architectural demons, with their goatish features, were not merely decorative. They served a dual purpose: to ward off evil spirits by frightening them with their own image, and to visually remind the congregation of the sin and devilry that constantly besieged the holy space. The Paeans had been exiled from their forests and imprisoned in stone, forever frozen as warnings against the wildness they once represented. Yet even chained to cathedral walls, their spirit was not so easily extinguished. Centuries later, a new wind began to blow through Europe, carrying with it the rediscovered texts and sculptures of the ancient world. The Renaissance did not just revive classical art, it performed a resurrection, and among the first spirits to walk again were the pains. No longer medieval demons, they were reborn as emblems of a lost golden age, a pagan world imagined as one of unfettered joy, natural harmony, and profound beauty. Scholars and artists hungry for a vision of life before the strictures of the church found in these goat-legged beings the perfect symbol of a pre-Christian paradise. They represented an innocence that was not naive but sensually alive, a state of being in perfect tune with the natural world. This was a reclamation of pagan joy, a deliberate turning away from the grim visage of the gargoyle toward the playful smile of the faun. In the studios of Florence and Venice, they were painted not as tempters but as celebrants. Titian, the master of Venetian color, placed them in lush, sun-drenched landscapes. In paintings like his Bacchanal of the Andrians, fauns and satyrs mingled freely with mortals in a scene of overflowing wine, music, and relaxed sensuality. They are part of the fabric of a joyous, earthly celebration. Their animal has no longer a mark of sin but a testament to a unified, vibrant creation. Another artist utterly captivated by this theme was Piero di Cosimo. His works, like the forest fire or the discovery of honey, are teeming with a bizarre and wonderful menagerie, and among the creatures are fauns who seem to be discovering the world for the very first time. They are painted with a wondrous curiosity, observers and participants in a primal, unfolding drama of nature. In these scenes, the wildness of the pains is not threatening, it is the very source of life's richness and mystery. The Renaissance faun became a fixture in garden sculptures and palace frescoes, an aesthetic declaration that beauty could be found in the untamed, and that the ancient world held wisdom modern life had forgotten. This artistic revival was more than decoration, it was a philosophical statement. By resurrecting the pains in paint and marble, the Renaissance was arguing for a broader, more joyous human experience, one that embraced the body, the senses, and the natural world as realms worthy of celebration, not suspicion. The goat-legged spirit had been liberated from the gargoyle's scowl and was once again piping a tune of rustic delight in the golden light of a new age. The Renaissance's celebration of pagan joy was merely a prelude to a far deeper philosophical embrace. By the late 18th century, a powerful new movement was sweeping across Europe, one that would elevate the goat-legged god and his tribe to an almost sacred status. Romanticism did not merely admire nature, it worshipped it, seeking in its untamed grandeur a direct connection to the divine, the emotional, and the true self. And in this search, the Romantics found their perfect deity, not in the distant god of the cathedral, but in Pan. Yet this was not the mischievous piper of the Greeks, nor the garden ornament of the Romans. The romantic Pan was something vast, solemn, and profoundly mysterious. He was transfigured into the very soul of the natural world, the animating spirit within every forest, mountain, and storm. Poets and painters saw in his hybrid form a symbol of unity, the bridge between the human consciousness and the wild, unknowable heart of the earth. He became the embodiment of the sublime, that thrilling mixture of awe and terror one feels when standing before a crashing waterfall or a star-filled, silent sky. He was no longer a local spirit, but the universe itself breathing. The English poet John Keats captured this transcendent vision perfectly in his long poem Endymion. He writes, and the line still carries the weight of that revelation. O thou, whose mighty palace roof doth hang slash from jagged trunks, and overshadoweth slash eternal whispers, glooms, the birth, life, death slash of unseen flowers in heavy peacefulness. Here Pan is not a being with a specific shape. He is the palace itself, his roof the canopy of ancient trees, his presence the eternal whisper in the gloom. He is the cycle of birth, life, and death happening silently in the dark soil. This is nature deified, its processes sacred and complete. Percy Bysshe Shelley, in his Hymn of Pan, gave the god a voice to explain this new role. Through Pan's own words, Shelley proclaims, "I am the spirit of the earth, the sound slash of running water, and the wind that breathes slash her life into the newborn flowers." For the Romantics, every rustle in the leaves was Pan's breath, every babbling brook his song. This philosophical shift was monumental. It rescued Pan and his kind from being mere characters in myth or warnings in stone and recast them as essential concepts. They became the poetic answer to a growing industrial age, a symbol of everything pure, authentic, and overpowering that the smokestacks and factories were threatening to erase. The Romantic Pan was a protest in poetic form, a declaration that the wild world was not just a resource but a temple, and its priest was a goat-legged spirit whose music was the wind itself. In this transformation, the tribe of the Pains completed their journey from local genii to universal symbol, becoming forever etched in the modern mind as the face of nature's deepest, most sublime mystery. This philosophical deification of nature found a startling echo in the modern science of the mind. The wild god and his tribe did not vanish with the end of the Romantic era. They simply moved inward, taking up residence in the deepest layers of the human psyche. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, mapping the vast territory of the unconscious, recognized a powerful and familiar figure there. He saw Pan not as a forgotten deity, but as a living archetype, a universal pattern of instinct and imagery shared by all humanity. For Jung, Pan personified the untamed, instinctual part of ourselves that civilization works so hard to repress, the primal wild man within. This archetype is not evil, but it is potent and amoral, a force of raw creativity, boundless energy, and yes, sheer terror when it is ignored or denied. It represents everything we have tried to prune away to become polite, orderly members of society, our most basic drives, our connection to the animal body, and the chaotic wellspring of our passions. When this archetype is completely walled off, it doesn't disappear. It festers in the dark, growing stronger until it finds a way to erupt, and its method of eruption gives the ancient myth a terrifying modern relevance. We call it a panic attack. Think about the symptoms, the sudden, overwhelming dread that crashes over you without a clear external threat. The heart races as if fleeing an invisible predator. Breath becomes short and frantic. The mind is consumed by a terror that feels both profoundly personal and utterly alien. This is not a reasoned fear of a specific danger. This is the Pan archetype breaking through the dam of consciousness, a flash flood of primal fear from the unconscious depths. It is the psychological stampede the ancient Greeks attributed to the god's unseen presence in the mountain pass, now occurring within the private landscape of the self. In this light, a panic attack is a modern-day encounter with a pain, not in a forest but in the wilderness of one's own mind. The myth provided a story for a psychological reality we now name and treat, but the essence remains unchanged, a sudden, unreasoning terror that seems to come from nowhere because it comes from everywhere within us. It is the wild, goat-legged part of the soul, reminding us in the most visceral way possible that we have not fully domesticated ourselves, and perhaps we never should. This psychological echo found a vibrant new life on the pages of modern fantasy. The Pains, having survived demonization and philosophical rebirth, emerged in the 20th century as beloved fixtures of imagined worlds, their ancient DNA reshaped for new stories. C.S. Lewis gave us perhaps the most iconic modern faun with Mr. Tumnus in the Chronicles of Narnia. Stepping out from under his lamppost in the snowy wood, Tumnus is the gentle inheritor of the poetic tradition, not the mythical one. He is courteous, nervous, and deeply connected to the forest he calls home. His goat legs and tail are marks of his kind, not of menace, and his love of music and story is pure and sincere. In Tumnus, Lewis rehabilitated the faun completely, transforming the once feared pursuer of nymphs into a figure of vulnerability and kindness. proving these ancient forms could carry entirely new emotional weight. This opened the door for them to roam freely through the sprawling landscapes of contemporary fantasy. In countless novels, they appear as reclusive forest dwellers, wise trackers, or mischievous guides, their hybrid nature making them perfect ambassadors between the human realm and the hidden magical one. Their most systematic cataloging, however, happened on the gaming table. In role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, satyrs and fauns are standard entries in the monster manual, their stat blocks codifying their legendary traits into game mechanics. They possess innate magic tied to nature, a bonus to stealth in wooded areas, and that infamous ability to charm or frighten with their music. Here, a player can literally encounter the panic-inducing power of these creatures, rolling dice to see if their character resists a supernatural fear. This gamification is a fascinating form of myth preservation, translating ancient stories into interactive rules. Their cinematic arrival was both beautiful and brutal. Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth presents a faun of profound ambiguity, neither gentle like Tumnus nor simply mischievous. This ancient, cracking creature with roots for horns and eyes of stone is a direct conduit to a terrifying and wondrous underworld. He is a tester, a guide, and a potential trickster, his motives forever unclear. He offers the young heroine Ophelia a path to a magical kingdom, but his tasks are severe and his demeanor unsettling. This faun is not a decorative fantasy creature. He is a return to the mythic roots, a being of raw, immoral nature who operates by a logic older than human morality. In him, we see all the threads, the protector, the tempter, the wild god of the earth, woven into one mesmerizing and frightening figure. Across these modern incarnations, from the friendly Narnian to the stat-blocked adventuring foe to the enigmatic cinematic guide, their core remains perfectly intact. The hybrid body, the deep bond with untamed places, the musical gift, and the capacity for both charm and fright, these are the timeless signatures of the tribe. They prove that some mythical shapes are so powerful, so deeply etched into our collective imagination, that they can walk out of an Arcadian forest and into a child's bedroom, a dungeon crawl, or a dark fairy tale, and we recognize them immediately. We know their legs, we know their sound, and we understand instinctively that they speak for the wild places we have paved over but still dream of. Their modern journey from fantasy to psychology now leads us to a final, urgent frontier, the edge of our own vanishing world. The ancient tribe of goat-legged spirits may have found their most vital role yet, not as characters in a story, but as symbols for a planet in peril. In an age defined by climate change and mass extinction, the Pains transform from mythological figures into potent ecological metaphors. They are the endangered wilderness given a face and a voice. Their chaotic, unpredictable nature, once a source of fear for travelers, now mirrors the destabilized, erratic behavior of our own climate, the unseasonal storms and raging fires that feel like nature itself lashing out. Their role as protectors of specific groves and springs takes on a heartbreaking new meaning. Each Pain stood as the guardian of one unique place, and as those places are clear-cut, paved over, or poisoned, we are not just losing trees and water, we are silencing a chorus of ancient spirits. The panic they were famed for inducing, that sudden, unreasoning terror, finds a powerful modern parallel. It echoes in the growing, often suppressed, anxiety about ecological collapse, a deep-seated dread that can feel both overwhelming and paralyzing. This is not a fear of something in the woods, but a fear for the woods themselves and for the future they represent. In this light, the Pains become messengers. Their wild, untamable essence is a reminder of what we stand to lose, a world that operates on its own ancient, non-human logic. When we pave a wetland or strip a mountain, we aren't just destroying habitat, we are committing a kind of mythic erasure, dismissing a guardian spirit whose purpose we long forgot. The haunting sound of their panpipes could be heard as the last call of a species, the final melody of a glacier before it cracks into the sea. This makes these ancient beings strangely, desperately relevant to 21st century concerns. They remind us that the natural world is not a passive resource, but an active, sentient presence in the oldest stories of our culture. To ignore its plight is to invite a panic far greater than any mythical stampede, a tangible, global unraveling. The question their legacy asks us now is profound. Can we learn to hear the warning in their ancient music and rediscover the reverence that might just allow their wild, watchful spirits to endure? Beyond the general chorus of their tribe, a few pains stepped forward into the light of specific myth, their stories granting them rare individuality. Consider the brothers Agrius and Nomios, both sons of Pan, yet embodying two distinct facets of the rustic life their father ruled. Agrius was the hunter, a master of the wild chase. His name itself means the hunter, and he was said to roam the most remote peaks, his aim with the throwing stick unerring, his understanding of animal tracks absolute. He represented the necessary, skilled violence of nature, the predator who sustains himself by the laws of the wild. His brother, Nomios, whose name means the shepherd, presented a contrasting image. He was the pastoral caretaker, the protector of the tamed flock within the wild landscape. Myths tell of Nomios possessing a wondrous skill for music and prophecy, using his pipes not to incite panic, but to calm his goats and lull them into peaceful rest. He was sought out for his oracular whispers, a gentle guide in the wilderness. These two brothers, hunter and herdsman, illustrate the balanced duality the ancient world saw in nature itself, the cycle of taking and tending that defined survival on the edge of the wild. Another Pain dared to reach for glory that echoed his famous father's own rivalry. In a story that mirrors the contest between Pan and Apollo, a lesser-known Pain, sometimes called Marsyas or simply an unnamed challenger, foolishly picked a fight with the god of the lyre himself. This Pain, puffed with pride over his skill on the pipes, declared his rustic music superior to Apollo's refined harmonies. A contest was set with the muses as judges. The Pain played with all the wild passion of the forest, his melody raw and stirring. But Apollo, in a cunning move, played his lyre upside down and then sang alongside it in perfect, divine pitch, a feat the simple pipes could not match. The victory went to the Olympian, and the price for such hubris was severe. While Pan was merely laughed at for his loss, this lesser Pain suffered a far more grim fate, bound and flayed for his audacity. This brutal tale serves as a dark reminder of the hierarchy of the Greek cosmos. The wild music of the Pains, though powerful and evocative, belonged to the earthly realm. To challenge the celestial, cosmic order represented by Apollo was to invite not mockery but annihilation. These specific myths of the hunting brother, the shepherd brother, and the doomed challenger do more than just name a few goat-legged spirits. They carve distinct personalities into the generalized tribe, showing us that the ancient imagination saw not just a faceless horde, but individuals with different skills, destinies, and tragic flaws, each a unique note in the wild symphony of their kind. Their worship was as rustic and direct as the spirits themselves. You would never find a grand marble temple dedicated to a tribe of goat-legged tricksters. Their sanctuaries were the wild places they inhabited, marked only by the simplest of human gestures. A herdsman might pile a few uncut stones into a crude altar at the base of an ancient wind-twisted tree. He might leave a handful of wild strawberries or a small clay cup of goat's milk in the mouth of a cave where echoes behaved strangely. These were not elaborate ceremonies, but quiet, personal transactions with the local power. The offering was a gift, a bribe, and a sign of respect all at once, a humble plea for the Pain of that particular hillside to look kindly upon the flock and withhold its more chaotic impulses. The ritual was the act itself, performed without priests or hymns, a direct line from the human need for security to the capricious spirit of the land. This was worship stripped to its bare essentials, born from daily coexistence with a force that was both protector and peril. It acknowledged a simple truth that the farmer and the shepherd were guests in a realm ruled by older, wilder laws. The most formal recognition of this power came not in the countryside, but in the heart of the city itself, born from a moment of collective terror and gratitude. After the Athenian victory at the Battle of Marathon, the story spread that the god Pan had answered their prayers by sowing panic in the Persian ranks. In thanks, the Athenians established a cult for Pan in a cave on the northern slope of the Acropolis. More significantly, they wove honors for him into their greatest civic festival, the Panathenaea. This massive procession, which brought a new robe to the statue of Athena, included torch races and sacrifices that now acknowledge the wild god's role in the city's salvation. It was a fascinating incorporation, bringing the spirit of the remote mountain into the very center of civilized political life. Yet even here, the worship retained its practical core. The rituals for Pan were not about seeking philosophical enlightenment or moral guidance. They were about managing a relationship with a fundamentally unpredictable neighbor. You honored the pains so your cattle would not bolt, your springs would not run dry, and the sudden, silent dread would not find you alone on the path at dusk. It was a religion of pragmatism, a series of small peace treaties signed with milk and wildflowers, offered to the wild gods who held the high ground in every sense of the word. That journey from primal terror to poetic muse reveals a profound truth about ourselves. The story of the Pains is not just a forgotten myth, it is a mirror reflecting humanity's own evolving relationship with the wild world. They began as the very voice of nature's untamed and frightening power, a force to be placated with offerings from a trembling hand. Then, through the eyes of poets like Theocritus and Virgil, they were softened into gentle guardians of an idealized, harmonious countryside, symbols of a pastoral peace we longed to believe in. When that ancient world fell, their form was twisted into a caricature of evil, their goatish legs and horns becoming the uniform of the demonic in a new religious order that viewed nature itself with deep suspicion. Yet the Renaissance, hungry for beauty beyond the church walls, resurrected them as emblems of a lost, joyous freedom, painting them back into sunlit groves where they belonged. The Romantics went further, hearing in their pipes the very soul of the earth, transforming Pan from a woodland sprite into a sublime, universal spirit. Today, they walk among us in new forms as the archetype of our own repressed instincts in psychology, and as urgent symbols of an endangered natural world in our ecological anxieties. This incredible transformation, from local spirits of panic to global symbols of protection, tells a story far bigger than mythology. It charts our own journey from fearing nature as a chaotic adversary, to romanticizing it as a peaceful escape, to finally recognizing it as a complex, intelligent, and fragile system of which we are a part. The Pains never really changed. Their essence remained the wild, watchful presence in the lonely place. What changed was us and our understanding of what that wildness means. Their legacy asks us a final, haunting question. Having spent centuries first fearing them, then banishing them, then painting them, and now analyzing them, have we finally learned to listen to what they have been trying to say all along? Perhaps their deepest magic is how they refuse to stay safely in the past. The Pains still whisper to us because they are not merely characters from a dusty myth, but living symbols of a primal reality we have tried and failed to fully domesticate. They are the untamed energy that pulses in the blood, the sudden, irrational fear in the dark, the wild joy that makes us want to run barefoot through the grass. In our world of schedules, screens, and controlled environments, their chaotic freedom holds a strange and potent allure. They represent everything our modern lives are designed to suppress, the instinctual, messy, and gloriously unpredictable parts of existence. Think of that inexplicable urge to howl at a full moon, or the deep, wordless calm that comes from standing alone in a vast, silent forest. That is the call of the Pain. It is the part of us that remembers we are animals too, creatures of earth and instinct, not just minds trapped in bodies. Their enduring appeal is a form of nostalgia, but not for a historical time. It is a nostalgia for a state of being, for a wilder self and a wilder world we sense we have lost. We pave over the forests and light up the night, yet we still dream of dark woods and lonely mountains. We medicate our anxieties, yet we still feel that ancient panic rise in our throats. The pains give a face and a story to these contradictions. They are the guardians of the shadowy borderland between the civilized self we present to the world and the untamed spirit we carry inside. In a sense, every time we feel trapped by routine or yearn for an escape into nature, we are longing for the territory of the goat-legged spirits. Their myth endures because it is not really about them, it is about us. It is about the wildness we have walled away, both in our landscapes and in our own hearts, and the quiet, persistent truth that some walls can never be fully permanent. The pipes still play on the wind if we are brave enough to listen. Their story is a winding path from mountain crags to the modern mind. We have met them as the countless children of Pan, a tribe born from the wild's marriage to the divine, lords of every lonely forest and echoing cliff. We have felt their dual nature as bringers of haunting music and of that sudden, unreasoning terror we still call panic. We have watched their forms shift through the ages, from painted dancers on Greek pottery to demonic gargoyles on cathedral walls, and from poetic symbols of a lost Arcadia to psychological archetypes of our own untamed instincts. Their evolution is not just a record of artistic taste, but a map of our own changing relationship with the natural world and the wild spaces within ourselves. Myths like these are far more than forgotten stories. They are the ancient software of human understanding, frameworks we built to explain the unexplainable, to give a face to the wind's whisper and a name to the dread in the dark. They remind us that our ancestors looked at a storm or a silent grove and saw not randomness but personality, intention, and a sacred, watchful presence. In remembering the pains, we do more than recall a curious footnote from antiquity. We reconnect with a way of seeing that found meaning and mystery in every leaf and shadow, a perspective that might just hold a key to navigating our own complex world. So tell me, which part of their long journey resonated most with you? Was it their origins as the wild's first children, their fearsome power to induce panic, or their surprising rebirth in modern fantasy and psychology? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the tribe of goat-legged spirits, subscribe to keep exploring the hidden stories of ancient mythology.